Deep in the heart of Texas Hill Country, the Bennett Ranch sprawled like a testament to both ambition and privilege. Rolling hills covered in emerald green grass stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with sleek, thoroughbred horses grazing under the vast, open sky. The ranch wasn't just a place. It was an empire, a symbol of wealth and power built by one man's relentless drive to succeed. Richard Bennett, the man behind it all, stood on the porch of his grand estate, surveying the land that had come to define him. His mansion was a masterpiece of modern architecture, with tall glass windows reflecting the golden hues of the Texas sun and a grand entrance lined with immaculate oak trees. Inside, it was even more extravagant: marble floors, leather furnishings, and walls adorned with trophies, awards, and photographs of prize-winning horses. Richard himself was as imposing as the ranch he owned. At 48, he carried an air of authority that could silence a room. His salt and pepper hair was always neatly combed, and his piercing gray eyes seemed to see through people. Dressed in a crisp white shirt and dark jeans, he looked every bit the part of a wealthy rancher. But beneath his polished exterior lay a man hardened by life. Raised by a struggling cattle rancher, Richard had clawed his way to the top through sheer determination, and by making difficult, sometimes ruthless, decisions. As he leaned against the porch railing, Richard's foreman, Joe Carter, approached. Joe, a wiry man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin, was one of the few people who could speak candidly with Richard. "Boss," Joe began, adjusting his hat, "we've got a situation with one of the Maras. Grace. She's not doing well." Richard frowned. Grace was a beautiful chestnut mare, but her pregnancy had been fraught with complications. She was valuable, or at least she had been before her condition deteriorated. Now, she was a liability, a term Richard hated but often used. "What's the prognosis?" Richard asked, his tone clipped. Joe hesitated. "It's not good. The vet says there's a slim chance she'll survive the birth, and even if she does, the foal might not make it. We've done everything we can, but," Richard sighed, the weight of his decisions pressing heavily on his chest. He didn't like wasting resources, especially not on a lost cause. He had built his empire by focusing on results, not sentimentality. "Send her away," Richard said finally, his voice cold and resolute. "Take her somewhere far. The desert, maybe. Let nature take its course." Joe's eyes widened. "The desert? Boss, she won't stand a chance out there." "That's the point," Richard snapped. "We're not running a charity, Joe. This is a business. If she's not profitable, she's gone. End of discussion." Joe nodded reluctantly, though his expression betrayed his unease. As he walked away, Richard turned back to his view of the ranch. He told himself it was the right decision, a practical one, but as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. He quickly brushed it aside. Doubts were a luxury he couldn't afford. The journey to the Arizona desert was long and silent. Grace, the chestnut mare, stood quietly in the trailer as it rumbled down endless highways. Her once glossy coat was now dull, and her movements were slow and labored. The two ranch hands assigned to the task, Tom and Ray, sat in the truck, neither speaking much. The weight of what they were doing hung heavily in the air. "Don't sit there sulking, Ray," Tom muttered, breaking the silence. He was older, gruff, and had worked on the Bennett Ranch for years. "We've got a job to do." Ray, younger and visibly uncomfortable, stared out the window. "This ain't right, Tom. She's pregnant. Leaving her out there is a death sentence." Tom tightened his grip on the steering wheel. "You think I don't know that? Orders are orders. Richard Bennett doesn't pay us to have opinions." Ray shook his head, the knot in his stomach tightening. "Yeah, but we're not just talking about a piece of equipment. She's alive. She trusts us." Tom didn't respond. Instead, he turned the truck off the main road and onto a dirt path leading into the Arizona desert. The landscape was barren and unforgiving, with cacti and jagged rocks scattered across the dry, cracked earth. The late afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, casting long shadows over the rugged terrain. When they reached a secluded spot far from any signs of civilization, Tom killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening. He got out of the truck, opened the trailer, and led Grace down the ramp. She stumbled slightly, her thin legs trembling under the weight of her pregnancy. Ray watched from a distance, his heart aching. He felt a pang of guilt as Grace turned her head to look at them, her large, expressive eyes filled with confusion. She didn't understand why she was here or why they were leaving her. "You gonna help or just stand there?" Tom barked, pulling a small bundle of hay from the truck and tossing it on the ground. "What's the point of hay if we're just gonna leave her to die?" Ray shot back, his voice shaking. Tom paused, sighing heavily. "It's not up to us. She's not our horse. Let's just finish this." Ray clenched his fists, but reluctantly followed. Together, they removed Grace's halter, a symbolic final gesture to ensure she could fend for herself. The mare sniffed the air, her ears twitching, as if trying to make sense of her new surroundings. Before climbing back into the truck, Ray crouched beside Grace. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. "You didn't deserve this." Tom called out from the driver's seat. "Let's go, Ray. We're done here." Ray hesitated, then stood and walked back to the truck. As they drove away, he looked in the rearview mirror, watching Grace grow smaller and smaller until she disappeared entirely. He couldn't shake the image of her standing there, alone and vulnerable in the vast expanse of the desert. For the rest of the drive back to the ranch, neither man spoke. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional crunch of gravel beneath the tires. Ray stared out the window, haunted by what they had done. While Tom kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, his jaw clenched. Back at the ranch, Richard was waiting. When Tom and Ray reported that the task was complete, he simply nodded, showing no sign of remorse. For him, it was just another decision, another cost of doing business. But far away in the Arizona desert, under the fading light of the setting sun, Grace stood alone, her breathing heavy. The land was harsh and unwelcoming, but somewhere deep within her, a spark of life remained. She lowered her head, nibbled at the hay, and took a tentative step forward. She wasn't ready to give up, not yet. The Arizona sun blazed mercilessly over the desert, turning the air thick and dry. Emily Carter shielded her eyes with one hand as she guided her old pickup truck down the dusty road toward her family's modest farm. At 24, Emily had grown up in this rugged land and knew its challenges well. Her sun-kissed skin and calloused hands were a testament to years of hard work, helping her parents keep their small farm afloat. Life wasn't easy, but Emily loved the desert. Its quiet resilience mirrored her own. As she drove along the narrow road, something unusual caught her eye. Far in the distance, near a cluster of cacti, stood a lone figure, a horse. Slowing her truck, she squinted to get a better look. The mare was thin, her ribs visible under her chestnut coat, and she appeared to be limping. Emily's heart sank. "Who would leave a horse out here?" she muttered, pulling the truck over. Grabbing a water bottle and a rope from the back, she approached cautiously. The mare turned her head as Emily drew closer, her dark eyes filled with a mix of fear and exhaustion. "Hey there, girl," Emily said softly, her voice calm and reassuring. "It's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." The horse flinched but didn't run. Emily noticed her swollen belly and realized she was pregnant. The situation was worse than she'd thought. Kneeling slowly, she held out her hand, offering a small sip of water from the bottle. Grace hesitated, then took a few tentative steps forward. "That's it," Emily whispered. "You're okay now." It took nearly an hour of patience and quiet coaxing before Emily was able to loop the rope gently around the mare's neck. She led her carefully back to the truck, improvising a makeshift ramp with an old wooden plank she kept in the bed. The mare hesitated but eventually climbed into the truck's trailer, her movements slow and unsteady. Emily drove back to the farm with a sense of urgency. Her parents, Jack and Marlene Carter, were waiting on the porch when she arrived. Jack, a rugged man in his late 50s, raised an eyebrow as Emily stepped out of the truck. "What VE you brought home this time, Em?" he asked, half amused but mostly concerned. "A pregnant mare," Emily replied, brushing the sweat from her brow. She was abandoned in the desert. She wouldn't have made it much longer. Jack frowned but didn't argue. He had seen his daughter's compassionate streak many times before. We don't exactly have resources to spare, he said, his voice gruff but not unkind. But let's see what we can do. Marlene, a kind woman with gentle eyes, appeared at Emily's side. You did the right thing, sweetheart, she said, patting her daughter's shoulder. Let's get her settled. The family worked quickly to prepare a small enclosure for the mare. Emily fetched buckets of water and hay while Marlene laid down fresh bedding in one of the stalls. Jack examined the mare's condition, shaking his head. She's in rough shape, he said, but she's a fighter. Emily knelt beside the mare, stroking her neck. I'll call her Grace, she said softly, because that's what it took to survive out there. Grace and a lot of courage. Over the next few days, Emily devoted herself to Grace's care. She spent hours cleaning her wounds, feeding her small portions to rebuild her strength, and sitting with her in the quiet moments to offer comfort. Grace gradually began to trust her, nuzzling Emily's hand when she approached. Late one night, as Emily sat by the stall, her father joined her, leaning against the wooden door. You've got a big heart, Em, he said. Bigger than this world sometimes. Emily smiled, though her eyes remained fixed on Grace. I just couldn't leave her, Dad. She didn't deserve that. Jack nodded, his voice softer than usual. I know, and maybe, just maybe, she'll make it because of you. As the desert nights grew cooler, Grace's strength began to return. But the hardest part was yet to come. Emily knew that bringing new life into the world was never easy, especially under these circumstances. Yet, as she looked at the mare resting peacefully in her stall, she felt a spark of hope, small but steady, like a flame refusing to be extinguished. The early morning air was crisp, a welcome reprieve from the scorching heat that gripped the Arizona desert during the day. Emily Carter had spent another sleepless night in the barn, her eyes heavy but her heart determined. Grace had grown increasingly restless over the past few days, a clear sign that the foal's arrival was imminent. Emily checked the mare again, kneeling beside her and running a hand gently along her swollen belly. Grace let out a soft whinny, her ears flicking back in discomfort. It's okay, girl, Emily whispered, her voice soothing. You've got this. I'm right here with you. Her father, Jack, entered the barn carrying a thermos of coffee and a bucket of clean water. How's she doing? He asked, his voice low. She's close, Emily replied, glancing up at him. I can feel it. Jack crouched down, studying the mare. His weathered hands rested on his knees, and his expression was one of quiet concern. You've been amazing with her, Em, he said after a moment. But this part's gonna be tough. I know, Emily said, determination flashing in her tired eyes. But I'm not giving up on her. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Emily stayed by Grace's side, her hands steady even as the tension in the barn grew. When the first signs of labor began, she called her mother, Marlene, for assistance. The family worked together seamlessly, their years of experience with animals guiding their every move. The process was long and grueling. Grace groaned in pain, her powerful body trembling as she pushed. Emily murmured words of encouragement, her hands gently stroking the mare's neck. You're so strong, Grace, she said. Just a little more. You're almost there. Finally, as the afternoon sun began to cast golden light through the barn's wooden slats, the foal was born. Emily's breath caught as she saw the tiny creature lying in the straw, a beautiful colt with a sleek coat and sturdy legs. He's here, Emily whispered, her voice thick with emotion. She reached out carefully, wiping the foal's nose and mouth with a clean towel. Grace turned her head, nuzzling her newborn, her eyes filled with a tenderness that only a mother could express. Jack and Marlene stood back, watching with a mixture of relief and pride. He's a strong one, Jack said, his voice breaking the silence. Looks like he's got a good chance. Emily smiled through tears as she watched the colt take his first wobbly steps, guided by Grace's gentle encouragement. She decided on his name almost instantly. Hope, she said softly, the word carrying the weight of everything they had endured. That's his name, because he's proof that no matter how hard things get, there's always hope. Marlene placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. It's perfect, she said, and so are you for believing in them. Over the next few days, Hope grew stronger, his curiosity and energy bringing new life to the small farm. He followed Grace everywhere, his little legs galloping through the open pen as she watched over him protectively. Emily couldn't help but laugh as she saw him chase after a butterfly, his playful spirit a stark contrast to the struggle that had brought him into the world. But even as Emily celebrated Hope's arrival, she couldn't ignore the nagging thought in the back of her mind. Grace's health remained fragile, and the road ahead would require just as much dedication and care as the journey so far. Yet as she stood in the barn one quiet evening, watching Hope nuzzle his mother, Emily felt a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time in a long while, the desert didn't feel so harsh. Life, even in its most fragile state, had found a way to thrive. The days following Hope's birth were filled with an intense rhythm of care and adaptation. Emily Carter woke at the crack of dawn each morning, her first stop always the barn. The small, modest structure had become the center of her world. Its wooden beams, weathered by years of desert winds, now housed not just Grace and Hope, but a growing bond between them all. Hope, the newborn colt, was thriving. His legs, still slightly awkward, carried him across the small paddock with boundless energy. Emily couldn't help but smile as she watched him explore, his tiny whinnies echoing against the barn walls. Yet Grace's condition was still precarious. While she cared for her colt with quiet determination, her energy waned quickly, and Emily knew the mare's recovery was far from guaranteed. Emily had taken on the role of caretaker with a fierce resolve. Every day, she cleaned Grace's stall, mixed supplements into her feed, and monitored her hydration. For Hope, she provided gentle touch and encouragement, coaxing him to trust her. "You're a little fighter, aren't you?" Emily said one morning, scratching behind Hope's ears as he nuzzled her hand. "Just like your mama." Her father, Jack, watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame. "You've got a knack for this, Em," he said. "That colt trusts you more than anyone." Emily turned to him, wiping her hands on her jeans. "It's not just trust, Dad. He needs to believe in me the way I believe in him. He's special. I can feel it." Jack crossed his arms, a skeptical look on his face. "Special doesn't pay the bills, Emily. This farm's hanging on by a thread, and you're spending all your time on a horse we can't afford to keep." Emily's expression hardened. "He's more than just a horse, Dad. He's a chance to prove that we're not beaten. That even in the worst circumstances, we can make something good happen." Jack sighed, shaking his head. "I just don't want to see you disappointed." "I won't be," Emily replied firmly. "Hope's going to make it. So will Grace. I'll make sure of it." Her determination only grew stronger with each passing day. Despite their limited resources, Emily devised creative ways to train Hope. She set up a makeshift obstacle course in the paddock, using hay bales and old barrels as challenges for him to navigate. She guided him patiently, rewarding his efforts with soft words and gentle pats. Hope's intelligence and agility became apparent quickly. He learned to trot over the obstacles with ease, his confidence growing with every small victory. Emily saw something in him that filled her with a deep sense of purpose, raw potential waiting to be shaped. One afternoon, as Emily led Hope through his training exercises, her mother, Marlene, approached with a concerned look. "Emily," she said gently, "you're doing a wonderful job with him, but you're wearing yourself thin. You haven't had a proper night's sleep in weeks." Emily stopped, looking at her mother with a tired but determined gaze. "I know, Mom, but this is important. Hope is important." Marlene smiled softly. "I understand, but remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. Take care of yourself, too." That evening, as the sun set behind the distant mountains, Emily sat by the paddock, watching Grace and Hope graze together. The colt's playful antics brought a rare lightness to the farm, and for a moment, Emily allowed herself to rest. The air was warm, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, and the sound of crickets filled the silence. She whispered into the twilight, more to herself than anyone else, "We're going to make it. All of us." The journey was far from over, but Emily's unwavering dedication had laid the foundation for something extraordinary. In the quiet of the desert night, surrounded by the resilience of life, she felt a glimmer of hope for the farm, for Grace, and for a future she was determined to shape. By the time Hope reached 6 months old, his reputation had already begun to extend beyond the quiet corners of the Arizona desert. Emily's efforts to train the colt had not gone unnoticed by the few visitors to the Carter farm. Word spread quickly among neighboring farmers and small-town ranchers. There was something extraordinary about the young horse being raised on a shoestring budget by the determined Carter family. It started with casual conversations at the local feed store. Emily's neighbor, an older rancher named Hank Miller, had stopped by one afternoon and seen Hope navigating Emily's makeshift obstacle course. He'd been struck by the colt's fluid movements and sharp instincts. "That horse moves like he's got fire in his veins," Hank had remarked to a group of ranchers over coffee the next morning. From there, the rumors snowballed. One sunny afternoon, Emily was leading Hope through a new training routine. She had borrowed a set of used barrels from Hank and arranged them in a pattern to simulate a competition course. Hope's strides were long and confident, his glossy coat glistening in the sun. Emily clucked her tongue, signaling him to pick up speed. The colt responded instantly, weaving gracefully through the barrels. "Good boy, Hope," Emily called, her voice filled with pride. She glanced toward the barn, where her father stood with crossed arms, watching silently. Jack had been skeptical at first, but even he couldn't deny the colt's potential. As Emily finished the routine, she noticed a sleek black truck pulling up the dirt driveway. A man in a crisp blazer and polished boots stepped out, clearly out of place in the rustic surroundings. Emily's heart sank slightly. She had a good idea of what was coming. The man approached, tipping his hat politely. "Afternoon," he said with a practiced smile. "I'm Alan Pierce, a representative of Bennett Ranch." Emily stiffened at the mention of the name. Richard Bennett was a looming figure in the equestrian world, known for his vast wealth and relentless pursuit of top-tier horses. The very thought of him sent a chill through her. "What can I do for you, Mr. Pierce?" she asked, her voice cool but polite. Pierce's smile didn't waver. "I've heard quite a bit about your colt, Miss Carter." "Hope, is it?" "Word is, he's something special." Emily glanced at Hope, who stood by her side, his ears perked and his eyes alert. "He is special," she said simply. Pierce nodded, pulling a checkbook from his pocket. "Mr. Bennett is very interested in acquiring him. I'm authorized to make you an offer that would more than compensate for your time and effort." Emily's jaw tightened. She stepped in front of Hope, her protective instincts flaring. "He's not for sale," she said firmly. Pierce raised an eyebrow. "Miss Carter, I don't think you understand. This could be life-changing money. Enough to take care of your family, fix up this farm, and still have plenty left over." Emily took a deep breath, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Pierce, but Hope isn't just a horse to me. He's family, and I'm not selling family." Pierce's smile faltered for the first time. He tucked the checkbook back into his pocket, his expression turning slightly colder. "I'll relay your decision to Mr. Bennett," he said, tipping his hat again. "But I'd advise you to reconsider. Opportunities like this don't come around often." Emily watched as the truck disappeared down the road, her chest tightening with frustration and resolve. She turned to her father, who had been silent during the exchange. "What are we supposed to do, Dad? People like Bennett think they can buy whatever they want." Jack nodded slowly. "That's the way of the world, Em. But you did the right thing. You stood your ground." Emily ran her hand along Hope's neck, drawing strength from the colt's calm presence. "He deserves better than being just another trophy in some rich man's stable." The encounter marked the beginning of a new challenge for Emily. Rumors about Hope continued to grow, drawing attention from more than just the Bennett Ranch. Strangers began showing up unannounced, each with their own pitch and promises. But Emily stood firm, her love for Hope outweighing any financial temptation. As the days went on, Emily's resolve deepened. Hope wasn't just a symbol of her dedication. He was a reminder that some things couldn't be bought, no matter how high the price. It wasn't long after Alan Pierce's visit that others began to come calling. Ranchers, trainers, and investors from neighboring states arrived unannounced, their cars kicking up clouds of dust as they pulled into the Carter farm. Each of them came with the same intent, to buy Hope. Emily, however, met every offer with a polite but unwavering refusal. To her, the idea of selling Hope was unthinkable. He wasn't just a horse. He was a part of her family and a testament to everything she and Grace had endured. Yet with every new visitor, the pressure mounted. One afternoon, as Emily finished grooming Hope in the paddock, she noticed a sleek SUV pulling into the driveway. The vehicle's tinted windows and shiny exterior set it apart from the other trucks and beat-up cars that usually visited the farm. Her stomach tightened as she recognized the man who stepped out. It was Richard Bennett himself. He was taller in person than she had expected, with a commanding presence that seemed to fill the open space around him. Dressed in a tailored shirt and dark jeans, he exuded confidence and control. As he approached, Emily met him halfway, her arms crossed defensively. "Miss Carter," Richard said, his deep voice smooth but firm. "I'm Richard Bennett. I believe you've met my representative, Alan." "I have," Emily replied curtly. "And I told him Hope isn't for sale." Richard smirked, his gray eyes narrowing. "I admire your conviction, but I thought it best to hear that directly from you." "You're hearing it now," Emily said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. "Hope isn't for sale. Not to you, not to anyone." Richard glanced toward the paddock, where Hope stood watching the exchange. His trained eye assessed the colt's movements, the way he carried himself with an effortless grace. It was clear to him that the rumors hadn't been exaggerated. "You have a remarkable horse," he said, his tone measured. "But a horse like that belongs in a place where he can reach his full potential." "I can provide that," Emily bristled. "Hope is already where he belongs, with someone who loves him and believes in him. He doesn't need your money or your luxury stables to be great." Richard's expression hardened. He was a man unaccustomed to being told no, especially by a young woman on a struggling farm. "You're being short-sighted," he said, his voice sharp. "Do you realize what I'm offering you? A chance to secure your future, to save this farm. All for one horse." Emily stepped closer, her gaze unwavering. "And do you realize what you're asking me to give up? Hope isn't just a horse to me. He's proof that with hard work and belief, we can overcome anything. That's something money can't buy." The two stood in tense silence, the desert wind carrying the sound of distant birds. Finally, Richard let out a sigh, his posture relaxing slightly. "You're a stubborn one. I'll give you that," he said. "But this isn't over." He turned and walked back to his SUV, his boots crunching against the gravel. Emily stood her ground, watching as the vehicle disappeared down the road. Her heart was pounding, but she refused to let it show. Later that evening, as she sat with her parents at the dinner table, the conversation turned to Bennett's visit. Jack shook his head, his face etched with worry. "That man doesn't take no for an answer, Em. He'll be back." "Let him come," Emily said firmly. "I'm not selling Hope. Not now, not ever." Marlene reached across the table, placing a hand over her daughter's. "We're proud of you, sweetheart. But standing up to someone like Richard Bennett isn't easy." "I don't care how powerful he is," Emily said, her voice steady. "Hope deserves more than being a pawn in someone else's game. He's my family, and I'll protect him." As the moon rose over the desert, casting a silver glow across the farm, Emily sat by the paddock, watching Hope graze beside Grace. She felt a renewed sense of determination. No matter how many offers came her way, no matter how much pressure she faced, she would stand firm. Hope wasn't just her horse. He was her promise to herself that some things were worth fighting for. The desert mornings were Emily's favorite time of day. As the sun crept over the horizon, casting its golden light across the farm, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. Hope's training had become her daily ritual, a steady rhythm that brought structure to her life. But now, that routine carried an added goal: preparing him for his first competition. It wasn't an easy decision. Emily knew entering the world of competitive equestrian events would mean stepping into a realm dominated by wealth, influence, and the very people she wanted to avoid, like Richard Bennett. But she also knew Hope's potential deserved to be seen. If he could win, it would prove to everyone, including herself, that greatness could come from even the humblest beginnings. "Are you sure about this, Em?" Jack asked one evening as they sat on the porch, the cool breeze carrying the scent of freshly cut hay. Emily nodded, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. "Hope's ready, Dad. He's got the skill, the drive, and the heart. I owe it to him to try." Jack sighed, his weathered face thoughtful. "These competitions aren't just about the horse. You'll be up against people with money to burn, fancy equipment, and connections. It's not a level playing field." "I know," Emily said, her voice firm, "but we've got something they don't, a bond. Hope trusts me, and I trust him. That's worth more than any amount of money." Her father studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "All right, just don't forget where you came from, no matter how far this takes you." The first competition was a small regional event held in a nearby Texas town. Emily had scraped together the entry fee by selling a few old tools and convincing her parents to let her use their truck to haul Hope. When they arrived, she immediately felt out of place. The parking lot was filled with sleek horse trailers, and the riders were dressed in pristine riding gear that made her second-hand boots and faded jeans look shabby. But Emily refused to be intimidated. She led Hope to the warm-up ring, her heart racing as she caught sight of the other competitors. They looked polished and professional, their horses gleaming with the care of expert grooms. In contrast, Hope was still growing into his frame, his energy raw but undeniably powerful. "All right, boy," Emily whispered, stroking his neck. "We don't need to be fancy. Just show them what you've got." As the competition began, Emily felt her nerves rise. The announcer called her name, and she led Hope into the ring, her grip on the reins steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The course was a series of jumps, each one higher and more challenging than the last. Hope pricked his ears, his muscles tensing beneath her as they approached the first jump. Emily leaned forward slightly, her voice calm but commanding. "You've got this, Hope. Let's go." The colt responded with a surge of energy, clearing the jump with room to spare. The crowd murmured in surprise. This wasn't the polished performance of a seasoned competitor, but it was undeniably impressive. As they continued through the course, Hope's natural talent shone through. By the final jump, the audience was on its feet, cheering for the unlikely pair. When the results were announced, Emily's heart nearly stopped. Hope had placed first. The small crowd erupted into applause, and Emily couldn't help but grin as she patted his neck. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "We really did it." Word of their victory spread quickly, and soon, Emily found herself fielding invitations to larger competitions. Each win brought more attention, and with it, more challenges. The other competitors began to take notice, some offering grudging respect while others muttered about the farm girl who didn't belong in their world. But Emily didn't care. She had entered this journey for one reason: to show the world what Hope could do. And as the competitions grew in size and prestige, so did their bond. Together, they were unstoppable, a testament to the power of trust and perseverance. Yet in the shadows, Richard Bennett watched from afar, his interest in Hope only growing. For him, the victories were a reminder of the one thing he couldn't buy. And he wasn't ready to give up, not yet. The Bennett Ranch loomed large in Emily's mind as she drove back from another competition. Hope had won again, his growing reputation making him a rising star in the equestrian world. Yet, with every success, Emily felt the pressure mounting. Rumors of Richard Bennett's renewed interest reached her from every corner. People whispered about his persistence, how he never let a valuable asset slip through his fingers. It wasn't until one crisp autumn afternoon, as Emily tended to Hope in the paddock, that Richard made his move. The sleek black SUV returned, its tires crunching against the gravel driveway. This time, Richard stepped out alone. He was dressed sharply in dark jeans and a fitted blazer, his polished boots gleaming. His presence seemed to darken the farm's modest charm, his commanding aura unmistakable. Emily straightened from where she'd been brushing Hope, her heart pounding. She hadn't expected him to show up unannounced, yet here he was, striding toward her with the confidence of a man who always got what he wanted. "Miss Carter," he said, tipping his hat slightly, "I thought it was time we had a conversation, face to face." Emily kept her posture firm, her hand resting protectively on Hope's neck. "Mr. Bennett, I think we've said everything we need to." Richard chuckled, though there was no humor in his eyes. "I'm not sure we have. You've made quite a name for yourself, and for Hope. He's extraordinary, I'll give you that. But let's be honest. A horse like him doesn't belong in a place like this. Emily's eyes narrowed. And where exactly do you think he belongs? In one of your stables? Paraded around as a trophy? Richard's expression didn't waver. In a place where he can reach his full potential. You've done an admirable job, but your resources are limited. I can offer him the best training, the best facilities, everything he needs to become a champion on a global stage. Emily stepped closer, her voice steady and sharp. You think success is about money and luxury? Hope has everything he needs right here. Love, trust, and someone who believes in him. That's why he's a champion. Richard's gray eyes hardened. He had faced resistance before, but something about Emily's unwavering defiance struck a nerve. You're passionate. I'll give you that. But don't let pride blind you to reality. Your family's farm is struggling. You're barely scraping by. I'm offering you a way out, a chance to secure your future. Think of what you could do with the money I'm willing to pay. Emily's voice rose, a mix of frustration and conviction. You don't get it, do you? Hope isn't for sale. Not for any amount of money. He's not just a horse to me. He's family. And family isn't something you trade away. The tension crackled in the air between them. Richard's jaw tightened, but he forced a calm tone. You're making a mistake, Miss Carter. Opportunities like this don't come around often, and neither does a horse like Hope, Emily shot back. But you wouldn't understand that, would you? To you, he's just another investment. To me, he's proof that hard work and heart can beat money and power any day. For the first time, Richard seemed to falter. He looked past Emily at Hope, who stood calmly, his ears flicking as if sensing the weight of the moment. There was something in the colt's steady gaze, something even Richard couldn't deny. After a long silence, he straightened his posture. Very well, he said, his tone cool but resigned. You've made your position clear. But don't expect this to be the end. Without another word, he turned and walked back to his SUV. Emily watched as he drove away, the knot in her chest loosening only slightly. She knew this wasn't the last she'd see of Richard Bennett, but she also knew she'd stand her ground again if she had to. That evening, as Emily sat with her parents over dinner, she recounted the encounter. Jack listened intently, his face a mixture of pride and concern. He's not going to give up, Jack said finally, his voice heavy. Men like Richard Bennett don't walk away empty-handed. Emily set her jaw, her determination unwavering. Let him try. I'm not selling hope, no matter what. Marlene reached over to squeeze her daughter's hand. We're with you, Emily. Whatever it takes. As the stars blanketed the Arizona sky that night, Emily sat by Hope's paddock, the colt nuzzling her hand. The fight wasn't over, but she wasn't afraid. Hope had taught her that even against the odds, perseverance and heart could win. And she wasn't about to let anyone take that away. The months following Richard Bennett's visit were transformative for Emily, Hope, and the Carter family. Hope's victories in regional and national competitions cemented his reputation as a rising star in the equestrian world. With every win, Emily's name began to circulate among trainers, ranchers, and enthusiasts who were drawn to her unique story, one of perseverance, resilience, and an unshakable bond with her horse. One crisp morning, Emily stood by the paddock, watching Hope gallop effortlessly through the open field. Grace rested nearby, her once fragile body now stronger thanks to months of care. The farm had undergone changes, too. With the prize money from Hope's wins, Emily had repaired the old barn and invested in better feed and equipment. The improvements were small but meaningful, a reflection of her hard work and determination. As she leaned against the fence, a familiar sound broke her reverie, the hum of a car engine. Turning, she saw a black SUV making its way up the dirt road. Her chest tightened slightly. She knew who it was. When the car stopped, Richard Bennett stepped out, his usual air of confidence tempered by something different, an unspoken humility. This time, he wasn't dressed in his polished attire. Instead, he wore a simple button-down shirt and jeans, his demeanor more subdued. Emily met him halfway, her arms crossed. Back again, Mr. Bennett? Richard offered a faint smile. I didn't come to make another offer, if that's what you're worried about. She raised an eyebrow, skeptical. Then why are you here? Richard took a deep breath, his gaze shifting to Hope, who stood in the distance, his coat gleaming in the sunlight. I came to apologize, he said, his tone earnest. I underestimated you, Miss Carter. I thought I could buy my way into something that clearly means more to you than money ever could. Emily's expression softened, though she remained guarded. Why the change of heart? Richard hesitated, then continued, watching Hope succeed. Seeing what you've accomplished, it's made me realize that I've lost sight of why I started in this business. It wasn't always about money or trophies. When I was younger, it was about the connection, the trust between a horse and its rider. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that. Emily studied him, her defenses slowly lowering. And now, Richard said, his voice steady, I want to do something different. I've spent my career building an empire, but it feels empty. I'd like to use what I have to make a real difference. Emily's curiosity piqued. What are you suggesting? Richard glanced around the farm, his eyes lingering on Grace and Hope. A partnership. I want to start a program to rescue and rehabilitate abandoned or mistreated horses. You've already proven you have the heart and skill for it. With my resources and your vision, we could build something meaningful. Emily was silent for a moment, her mind racing. The idea was compelling, but her trust in Richard was still fragile. Why me? She asked finally. Because you remind me of who I used to be, Richard admitted. And because you've shown me what's possible when you put heart over profit. Emily looked at him, her eyes narrowing slightly as she searched for any sign of insincerity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. I'll consider it, but on one condition. Name it, Richard said. Hope stays here, she said firmly. He's not part of any deal. Richard smiled, a genuine expression that seemed to soften his normally stoic features. I wouldn't dream of it. In the months that followed, Emily and Richard worked together to launch their program, which they called New Horizons. The initiative focused on rescuing neglected horses and training them for new purposes, whether in competitions, therapy programs, or as companions. Their partnership was unlikely, but it worked, driven by a shared passion for giving horses a second chance. The Carter farm became the heart of the operation, with new barns and paddocks built to accommodate the growing number of rescues. Emily's family played a central role, their once struggling farm now a hub of activity and hope. As for Hope, he continued to excel in competitions, his story inspiring countless people across the country. Emily often received letters from young riders who saw her journey as proof that hard work and love could overcome even the greatest odds. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily stood by the paddock, watching Hope graze alongside Grace. Richard joined her, his hands in his pockets. You've built something incredible here, he said quietly. Emily smiled, her heart full. We built it together. But it all started with Hope. Richard nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Funny how one horse can change everything. Emily glanced at him, her eyes shining with gratitude. Not just a horse, a family. As the stars began to appear in the wide Arizona sky, Emily felt a deep sense of peace. Her journey had been anything but easy, but it had been worth every challenge. Together, they had turned pain into purpose, creating a legacy that would last for generations. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and watch this next story. It's incredibly emotional.